you survived Week 14 in your NFL Survivor Pools. We've got Week 15 covered for you. Coming up next, it's Scratching and Surviving. All right, guys, I am Statsational, former professional FX trader turned professional sports bettor and professional DFS player, and, of course, the co-founder of the Sharp app. If you have not checked out the Sharp app and you are interested at all in sports betting, I implore you to go ahead and head over to sharp.app, download the app today. Use code SURVIVE35. Code SURVIVE35 is going to get you 35% off our pro subscription. I do think it is well worth it if you are a sports bettor. Also, guys, I've got a brand new podcast. We just recorded the first episode yesterday. I've got some really interesting guests. If you are at all interested in sports betting, even if you're not interested in sports betting, if you're interested in the markets, any sort of risk taking, I've got authors, professors, psychologists, those involved in sports betting, some not involved in sports betting, and there's just going to be some really interesting conversations that I think a lot of people from all different walks and all different interests will be interested in this podcast. The podcast is called Better Thinking, and you'll be able to get it right here on the Sharp app channel. So give us a subscribe, and you can always click the notifications to be able to find out when that podcast drops. Really looking forward to it, enjoying it. I'm going to learn a whole lot, and I think you guys will as well. All right, for Survivor, last week it almost was chaotic, and it didn't quite get there. Philly, right down to the goal line there, or almost to the goal line, almost in the end zone was Carolina. The ball looked like it was a catch, and then upon further review was not. So Philly just hangs on by the skin of their teeth to be able to survive against Carolina. Carolina has scared us the last in the last few weeks a couple of times, once against Kansas City, and now, of course, and actually against Tampa as well, so 3 times there, and now against Philly, but they were not able to kind of put either of those teams away and pull out the late victory here against Philly, and Philly survived. So we don't get the big upset last week. You look at Circa, 51 remaining survivors there. They lost 1 on Tennessee. We did mention Tennessee last week, potentially for you guys in really large pools. But like I said, if you are in that large pool, you can almost get the same bang for your buck, or more bang for your buck, actually, and get the same thing, the same effect by taking a New Orleans team that was picked only slightly more than Tennessee, but was a larger favorite. Now, New Orleans, another team that barely got by. But if you did listen to that advice, took New Orleans, you're in pretty good shape there, having eliminated a team that you're likely not going to want to take again. And it almost worked out really well with, of course, Philly getting knocked out. You would have picked up quite a bit of equity without having to have taken one of the top teams. And then Philly, of course, is going to be a team that we may want to take here, or most likely, if you did save them, you're going to have them lined up for one of these future weeks, week 17 probably, and possibly week 18. But we'll get into that in a bit. The other thing at this point of the season that we always want to look at, and we should have been looking at this for the last few weeks. I know a lot of you guys who do watch the show are cognizant of it. You guys asked down below, but hedging at this point in the season is becoming more and more of a factor. Hedging is something that you want to do when you get down to few people left in your pool, or at least you want to consider when there's few people left in your pool. But there's 2 variables there. It's not just the amount of people left in the pool, it's also the time that remains in your pool. So there's 2 different factors there. When you have the fewer amount of people left in your pool, of course, that means that you have more equity. So the more equity you have in your pool, the greater the hedging opportunity becomes. But also time is a factor, because we have a finite amount of time. We know now there's only 4 weeks left. So when you have the amount of weeks left are 8, 9, 10 weeks, it becomes a lot more difficult to hedge in those situations. The reason being is because if we continually lose our hedge bet, we are constantly doubling that hedge just to get the hedge bet back, and we're not actually making any money, which is the whole purpose of the hedge bet. So the fewer weeks we have, the easier it is. It's always going to be an exponential increase, or assuming that you're doubling your hedge bet each week, which you may not necessarily be doing. But we could potentially be exponentially increasing our bet, which of course multiplies that hedge bet significantly once we get to that 4th, 5th, 6th week, to the point where now you're risking more than the pool is even worth in some instances. So it's important as we get down to just the final few weeks here that the hedging becomes a lot more confident. We can have more confidence in our hedge bet. Think about it this way. If we were down to week 18 and you were the only one on the last game, and of course in week 18, everyone sort of plays at the same times. The teams that need to play the divisional games and whatnot, they play them all at the same time so that there's no staggering and teams can't see what their opponents that they're competing with for playoff spots have done, so that everybody's kind of playing to win. But let's just assume that you were the only one left on a game and there was only 1 week left, or this was the last week and you were the last one left and you knew exactly what your opponents had done. Of course, you've got all the information in the world. You have every piece of information you possibly need. If you had $10,000 in your pot and there was one other person in your pool and they won their game and now it was up to your game, well, you know exactly what you need. You need to win your game just to split the pot. So you know if you win, you're going to get $5,000. You know if you lose, you're going to get nothing. You're going to lose whatever your entry was. If the same situation, that person that you're competing with lost, well, then you know if you win, you're going to win $10,000, and if you lose, you're going to win $5,000, because presumably if you both lose on that last weekend, they're going to chop the pot, and you're going to win $5,000, right? So you have all that information. You know what all the scenarios are, and it becomes much easier to make a hedge bet, right? So as we get closer to that final week and that final game, your hedging opportunities are going to become a lot clearer to you. So we're getting to that point here where it is clearing up, and you really want to consider hedge bets as you get to a high equity, low amount of people remaining in your pool. The other thing with hedge bet, I kind of alluded to it there. If you can have the latest game possible, it gives you more information. So we want to try and hedge games that are, or at least pick games that are on the Monday night or Sunday night schedule for that reason. Now, we're not going to just solely look at those games and disregard all the other games if there's better games for us to take. But if we're close and we're not sure between a couple of teams and one is playing late, one plays early, I would always lean towards that later team for hedging purposes. Now, this week, you've got Minnesota playing Chicago. That is a Monday night game. There's actually 2 Monday night games this week. That is one of them. And then Atlanta at Vegas is the other Monday night game. So both could potentially be games that you may take. Certainly Minnesota will be taken by a decent amount of people. You can see here on Survivor Grid, we've got 13% of the people taking Minnesota. You may be one of them. And like I said, if you've got an option between a couple of teams, maybe you're thinking between Arizona and Minnesota, you might want to lean towards Minnesota just because of that hedging opportunity. Plus, they do have a higher win percentage. But it's obviously going to depend on your pool, how many people you have left in the pool, and, of course, the teams that you have available to you, and potentially the teams available to your opponents as well. So a lot goes into what we're looking at and who we're going to take. I know most people look at Survivor Pools. We're just trying to pick the team that we think is going to win. You guys know I'm not always looking, I'm not necessarily ever looking for the team I think is going to win. I'm taking the teams, I'm looking at the math, I'm looking at the teams with the higher win probability, and then I'm playing some game theory here. And the game theory is going to come into play really significantly as we get down to fewer teams. So if you're in a heads-up situation, we're always looking for that heads-up situation to be able to take the most optimal path possible. I tell you guys this every week. If we dive into this week, maybe things will clear up a little bit here. We can see Baltimore is the largest favorite this week. Matter of fact, the largest favorite we've seen all season, and they're on the road at the Giants. We've seen the Giants just look abysmal so far. So if you have Baltimore, it's going to be very difficult for you to pass up on Baltimore. Now, certainly if you're in any pool of that is low in size, I can't see a situation here where you'd want to pass up on Baltimore. They're just too big of a favorite here. You just kind of take that free square, move on to next week, and we'll figure it out from there. But the only time that we're looking to maybe fade these big teams like Philly last week is possibly in a large pool. But even in a large pool, if you've got Baltimore available to you, I'd have a really hard time getting away from Baltimore this week. Now, when you're in that heads-up situation, let's go over to the spreadsheet and look at it. When you're in a heads-up situation, we're looking for the teams with the higher win percentage, and that's not always going to be the team with the higher win percentage this week. The optimal path, maybe you have to take a team that doesn't necessarily have the highest win percentage next week because you need them in the following week or the week after. That could be the case, but in this scenario here this week, we've got such a 90% chance here that Baltimore is going to win their game, and what I wanted to show you is the threshold column at 84%. That's 42.4% of the picks on Baltimore. With that number, you would need to pick a team 84% or better win percentage in order for that team to be worth it, or in order for Baltimore to be worth a fade. So it's very significant, that level there. Now, if you're in a pool, it's going to be hard to imagine a lot that you're going to have much more than this. Basically, everyone who's got Baltimore left is going to take them this week. Now, you may be down to 3 people in your pool, and all of you have Baltimore left, in which case, okay, potentially you could look to fade that team. Let's say you had 3 people left. We would change this number to 67% because now you're saying that 2 out of the 3 are definitely going to take Baltimore. But look at this. It's still 75%. You need to have a team that would have win percentage better than 75%. There's really only Washington. Minnesota is close. And these numbers aren't exact, right? There's a lot of science behind it, but there's an art to it as well. So what this is saying is even if 2 out of 3 people in your pool are going to take Baltimore, I would still be very hesitant about fading them. The threshold here is close to 75%. So we'll bring this back to where Survivor Grid has it at. And, that 83, 84% number is just too great for me to be looking to fade. Let's just head back to Survivor Grid. Let's look at what we've got going on now. Not everyone, obviously, is going to have the Ravens here this week. You've got Washington, a team that almost everyone is taken, which is why they're only being picked 4% of the time. If you do not have Baltimore, Washington's going to be a great option. You're going to have a lot of leverage over the field. Someone asked me in the comments what leverage is, and the leverage is basically it's sort of like the EV column here on Survivor Grid. Anything over 1 is considered to be plus EV, and under 1 is negative. It's when you're able to be able to pick a team that is low, that has a low percentage, or pick against a team with a high percentage. You're getting leverage against the field because the potential for you to be able to pick up a lot of equity that week is there. So what we've got a potential leverage play if you somehow still have Washington available. There have been several weeks where most people have wanted to take Washington. If you are one of the people who do have them left, it's going to be very hard to convince me to get off of Washington. It's going to really depend on your other teams here. But if you have them, just because of the fact that most people will not, Washington's going to be a very strong play. Again, their next best week here is probably Week 18 at Dallas, but I've warned you guys in the past, the one thing about Week 18, we've got to be really, really careful about saving teams for Week 18. You want to look ahead to Week 16, Week 17, absolutely. Week 18, we've got to take with a grain of salt. We don't know what teams are going to clinch, who are going to play starters, who will not be playing starters, potential injuries, of course, in the next few weeks. So you have to be careful. Now, I'm not saying not to map it out, but be prepared. Things may change going into Week 18. And teams that we just don't expect to be taking in Week 18 may suddenly become a pretty good play, as a team that is going to the playoffs may just sit and bench a lot of their starters. So we'll kind of deal with Week 18 when we get there. So Washington not getting a whole lot of pick percentage, of course, because they've been used quite a bit. Minnesota, I mentioned, 13% of pools are taking Minnesota. And a team that you really have to consider, especially for that hedging opportunity. They are playing the Monday night game. They're 7-point favorite here, 73% chance to win, 13% pick percentage. So keep Minnesota in mind. We don't have a real another opportunity. You're not going to want to take them at Seattle, Green Bay, at home, or at Detroit. So this is your last chance if you do have Minnesota. Again, this is all kind of contingent on the fact that you don't have Baltimore, and then we're going to look at these other teams kind of against each other because Baltimore's in a league of their own this week. But if you've got Minnesota, again, a hard time taking against them, especially in a small pool if I have a chance to hedge. If I have Minnesota and Washington, I might lean towards Washington, especially with more people in the pool, just because the fact that few will have, actually, even with few people left in the pool. If you're in a heads-up situation, you literally want to wait until the last possible moment. If you had a choice between Washington and Minnesota, they're very close right now as far as win percentage. You want to wait until you absolutely have to put the pick in and see if these lines change. All you want to do is get the higher win percentage. I know a lot of people who play these pools, and even people who gamble, but people who play the pools aren't necessarily those who are sports betting. And you say, well, these lines don't always hold true. That is, of course, accurate, but they're very close. So the win percentage over time is going to be the same as the actual win percentage. So the win percentage that is put on by the betting markets is going to be extremely close over time to what the actual win percentage is. It's the same thing as if you were flipping a coin or if you were picking cards out of a deck. You have a 1 in 52 chance of picking any card. Over the short term, of course, you may never pick that ace of diamonds if you keep saying, I'm going to pick an ace of diamonds here. I've got a 1 in 52 chance of picking it. In the short term, you may never see that. But if we do this tens of thousands of times, you're going to pick that ace of diamonds on the top of the deck. The ace of diamonds will be sitting there 1 out of every 52. You flip a coin, the same thing. Okay, we may flip 5, 6, 7 heads in a row in maybe 20 flips, but that's going to balance out. And I shouldn't even say in a row. What I should say is, let's say we flip a coin 20 times. You may get 15 heads and 5 tails in that 20 flips. It's not necessarily going to land exactly 50-50, but if we do it 10,000 times, it's going to be really close within a flip or two of being 50-50, because the probabilities over a long period of time with a large sample will kind of fall into place and be exactly what the probabilities are that we expect. Now, we don't necessarily see that in sports, but trust me, we've got something, it's called the wisdom of the crowds, and we've got a highly liquid market in the NFL. And let me quickly explain wisdom of the crowds. We actually talked about this on the podcast with Joseph Buchdahl, who is a sports analyst, sports data analyst. And we were talking about wisdom of the crowds. It's a great book. I've read the book. If you haven't, I highly suggest it. But in the book, what they're talking about, the crowd is smarter than the average person, than not just the average person, than the individual person, right? So the crowd, the more people and the more independent thoughts going into whatever the guess is, and in this case, the guess is who's going to win this game. The more independent thought and the more of the more liquid the market in this case, the more accurate that win percentage is going to be, which is why it's extremely difficult as far as a bettor is concerned to beat that. So your goal as a bettor is to be better than the masses and to be able to accurately predict at a higher percentage that Baltimore, if Baltimore here is 89.1%, and you thought that number was actually 80%, they should win this game 80% of the time, as a sports bettor, then you would be betting against Baltimore here, right? So you're not betting against them with the anticipation that you think they're going to lose the game. You're just betting against them that you know if they played this game 10,000 times and your model was more accurate than the entire market, you're going to win over time. You're going to win on that bet. So you don't really necessarily think that going into that game, you're going to win that game. You just see value on that play. And that's what professional sports bettors are doing. They're looking for value at all times, even if they know the bet's probably not going to win. Just like with the cards, if I said, I'll pay you 200 to 1 to guess what the top card is on that deck. Well, you'll take the bet, but you're probably not going to guess the top card on that deck. You're not going to be right? You've got a 1 in 52 chance of getting that right. But if we play this over time, you're going to be profitable. And that's what we do in sports betting. So kind of went through that whole thing just because people argue with me a lot about, the win percentage is not the ultimate. We should be handicapping these games on our own. Well, if you're good enough to handicap the games at a higher percentage than the market is, then go ahead. There's very few people who could do that. So you really want to take what's called the wisdom of the crowd. Take all that knowledge that's coming in from the crowd, from the market, and use that to your advantage. So that's why I tell you guys, when you're down to few people in the pool, Let's look at the market. Let's take it right at the last possible moment. And if you have the Sharp app, guys, even for free, you can see the Sharp on the Sharp app. You'll get all the sports books in there. You'll be able to see where the market is at on your phone in the app, and it's an accurate, up-to-date market. And you'll be able to see the money line there and what the percentages of that team winning the game. And you're going to want to use that information right before you put in your entry, okay? And that is going to be, over time, just as accurate as a coin flip's going to come out 50%, and just as accurate as picking the top card correctly is going to be 1 out of 52. You have to trust me on this. Over time, it's more accurate than just about anyone. Unless you've got a model that's better than that, I would stick to win percentage. All right, so we've got Washington, Minnesota. Minnesota, again, the hedge opportunity there. Arizona, another team, potentially, maybe you could take them next week, but we've got a lot of options in Week 16. It's going to depend on who you have left. But hosting New England, you got to kind of like them in that game. It's only 5.5 points. Cincinnati's at Tennessee. Road game. Tennessee they were looking better. They lose last week to Jacksonville. Who knows what you're going to get from either Cincinnati or Tennessee. But there is a good chance that you do have Cincinnati left, so potential pick. We've got a lot of teams here in that 66, even 64%, all the way up to Washington at 75% that are potential picks here. Cincinnati's getting almost 7% of the picks. Obviously, Arizona, a team that not a lot of people have taken. That's why they're getting 22% of the picks right now. Some lesser pick teams, Atlanta against Vegas, at Vegas. Again, that's a Monday night game. Depending on who you have left, you could potentially be looking at that as a potential hedge situation. You've got Philly, which almost everyone who has Philly almost everyone's taken Philly already, as we know last week. For those few of you who held on to Philly because you wanted to kind of go elsewhere, and I know there's some of you in the comments who did that because you were in pools that are very large, worked out well for you. Unfortunately, it would have worked out even better if Philly would have lost, but Philly gets Pittsburgh this week. Not a game that we're going to necessarily want to take. You certainly didn't hold Philly for this week if you could have taken them last week. So most people, as you see, 0.2%. Almost no one's going to take Philly in your pool, but we've got an eye ahead to that Week 17 matchup at home with Dallas. Kansas City at Cleveland, just not going to be taken much. And then Denver, Indianapolis, you can go down the list. Just none of these teams are going to be taken all that much. We'll go quickly over to the spreadsheet. And again, we don't really want to get too deep into the spreadsheet anymore. The spreadsheet becomes less important. This threshold column becomes extremely important. The rest of it becomes a little less important here as we get closer to the end of the season, because now we're going to kind of map it out. This future value doesn't mean what it really all that much anymore, because there's not that much of a future left. But you see, when we have it at 0, the top two teams, Baltimore and Washington, currently, this may flip. Minnesota may flip with Washington. Like I said, let's keep an eye on those lines. I know you guys want to see it anyway. Let's move it to 25%. Again, it's not going to change it much because we don't have that much future value. These teams become a lot closer in future value because there's not that much future value left. When we get to 100, let's see if it changes at all. And you'll see Arizona, of course, becomes a popular play because they do not have much future value left. But again, we don't need the spreadsheet necessarily to tell us that. Denver, interestingly, becomes the third choice. Again, another team with very little future left. A lot of you took Denver maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and that was a smart move. We did that because we were anticipating the fact that just Denver was not going to have a lot of future value, which they do not. And you can see on this list and on the spreadsheet, not garnering a whole lot of future value. So we've gone over quite a bit of information. I'm hoping that you guys can take that info and use it to at least get yourself some equity back in the way of hedging. And if not, of course, the main goal is to survive in your pool, advance, and let's get this thing all the way to the finish line. Of course, leave a comment down below. You guys, I'll be getting comments 5 minutes after this post, which is fantastic. Leave your comments. We'll walk it through. We'll talk it through together. And hopefully a lot of you are going to take your pools down this week. That's my hope. And if you don't, you'll advance. You'll get a little bit closer, maybe pick up some equity and get one step closer to winning your pool this week. All right, guys, that is it for me. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, download the Sharp app, and I will see you next week on Scratching and Surviving.